Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at Book Blather. If you're new here, I'm Dave, this is Olive, and we mostly talk about books. So I figured we'd try a little change of scenery today. We always film from the same spot in the office with all the books behind us, but tell us if you guys like it if we switch it up like this. Figured we'd try something different. So today we want to tell you about some of the books that we read earlier in June. So as you know, we read a lot of horror and science fiction, but we also read everything else. So we read regular, just all other types of fiction, and we read nonfiction, everything. We don't even read necessarily like new releases either. In fact, we often don't. We read some new releases, but a lot of times we'll just read random stuff. You know, something that's 5 years old, 10 years old, 30 years old. You know, that's part of the magic of the channel, right? You know, Book Blather is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So today we are doing some random literature. That's what we just kind of were in the mood to. We were stacking up a lot of just non sci-fi horror fantasy stuff, and so that we wanted to get to, and so we're just in the mood for it. So we read a few of those this month. So these are all authors that we've read before, and these books were all odd books. And so I want to tell you a little bit about them and some of the books that led us to these books. So sometimes we get recommendations from a UK booktuber, Savage Reads, right? That we've been exposed to literature in the UK that we otherwise never would have known about. And so, some years ago, we never talked about this one before, but this before we started the channel, he recommended this one, Swimming Home by Deborah Levy. And this was a really good book. This was published in 2011, and then it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I guess, in 2012. And this was a really good book in a bunch of different ways. This was about a family that I'm not going to talk too much about these older books because I read them a long time ago. So, but it was about this couple that rents a French villa along with some friends. And then when they get there, there is this naked woman, Kitty, I think, that is swimming in the pool, based on allegedly a mix-up about who was renting the villa. And so, the wife invites her to stay, insists that she stay. And so there's all these different people. And Kitty, of course, ends up being the catalyst for a bunch of different, some things that happen. And so, it was, the wife... The main wife was a journalist, and the guy was like really into poetry. So, kind of different dispositions and perspectives on, I guess, on how to look at life and go through life, in terms of just literal versus romantic and poetic. And so it's a good examination of the relationships and these relationships between the men and women, and age and marriage and infidelity and all this. And it starts off with a really strong scene, and the book doesn't end up the way you'd think. And so there was a number of things about this book that were really good. So we wanted to try something else by Deborah Levy. So we had picked up, when we saw it out in the wild, we had picked up this book called Hot Milk. This was published in 2016, I want to say. And this book was definitely odd. 2016. This book, not quite as dirty as it sounds, although it's a little bit dirty. So this is basically follows. It's mostly told through the eyes of the main character, Sophia, but also her mother, Rose. And Sophia and Rose, they are traveling to its coastal town in Spain, Almeria. And because Rose has this, she's had a host of different issues, and a father left when Sophia was very young. And Sophia has, for a good part of her life, she's in her mid-20s now, for a good part of her life, has had to attend to her mother's ailments. And the very significant one is that she seems to be suffering from this sort of paralysis, the lower part of her body, and she can't walk. And so they are going to see this doctor in Almeria, this Dr. Gomez, at his clinic, and he is a controversial doctor, and they had spend a bunch of money to get here. But his, the way he goes about trying to diagnose and treat her mother in a somewhat different way, and he purposely separates Sophia from Rose as he's doing a lot of this, and both traditional tests, but also just a lot of questions and a lot of discussions and things that he wants to have her mother engage in. And so Sophia ends up going and spending a lot of time off on her own, and she meets a number of different people. In particular, she meets another main character called Ingrid, and Ingrid has her own boyfriend, this Maddie. And then there is another guy that she meets works, I guess, at the beach hut. Was his name Juan or something? I don't remember. But so she meets these different individuals, and the Dr. Gomez has a daughter. It looks like Juliet, but it's Juliet, but it's pronounced Wooliet. Wooliet, something like that. Anyway, and so they and so it's a lot of this story is about it's about the relationship between Rose and Sophia, about this mother-daughter relationship, and these two people, that they're not just family, but they're very codependent, and they also are enablers of each other, right? So Sophia's very very dependent on her mother. She just she works in she's gone to school, but she works in a coffee house. She can't survive on her own. She depends financially on her mother, and her mother depends a lot on Sophia for these supposed ailments. And she has a lot of demands on Sophia. Sophia has to give her a lot of her time because, for example, one thing is water. She always needs water, and it's always, every time she gets water, it's the wrong type of water. She's constantly asking Sophia it's the wrong type of water, constantly asking her for the right type of water. It's water. So she has a lot of these sensitivities and issues. And so this sort of the two of them traveling here, and Dr. Gomez kind of separating them as he goes through this treatment, is really kind of a treatment for the two of them, because they're forced to kind of each have their own awakening, if you will, separate from so that Dr. Gomez ensures that the two of them are not able to further enable each other in their debilitative approach experience of life. And so Sophia, she's, even though she's in her mid-20s, you get the impression she's lived a relatively sheltered, innocent life, and so she has these sort of she starts to gain some independence, some awareness of what's going on with her mother, this sort of sexual experimentation from different angles, both with Ingrid and with the guy that she meets at the beach, and and obviously Rose has some growth of her own. So it was pretty interesting in that way. It was a pretty heavy exploration of their relationship and this and the effects of sort of driving a wedge in their relationship and letting them each try to have some sort of, like I said, some sort of awakening on their own. It's the story is told also, and it's very it's odd. I mentioned it was odd because it had this sort of dreamlike quality to it, and we're seeing it all through Sophia's eyes, but a lot of it is I kept having flashbacks to reading The Trial by Kafka. It was very much of that sort of surreal sort of thing where people would just show up, in these sort of dreamy sequences, all of a sudden, Ingrid would be at her door saying, I was waiting for you for forever. I was calling you, that sort of thing, where you get these sort of odd situations where people would just constantly appear really without explanation out of nowhere, or people would constantly be getting involved in Sophia's business. They're going to do this, or they're going they're gonna go get the car, they're gonna take her here, they're gonna, and it was just it had that sort of surreal, sort of dreamlike quality to the narrative, and so it was good. We are glad we read it. We didn't absolutely love it. Um, Incidentally, even though this was published in 2016, it was made into a movie in 2025, I think, just recently. And the movie was I'm not going to remember the actresses' names, but they did Sophia and Rose, the actors that did them they did a really good job. And the movie was very similar to the book in terms of just this sporadic sequence of interactions among the different individuals, and I mean the book was better, as is usually the case, but it was definitely very, very unusual. I don't read too many books with that sort of dreamlike, that sort of dreamlike narrative form that kind of makes me think of that I'm reading a Kafka book a little bit. It's not like reading a Kafka book, but it was it's not quite like that, but it was, like I said, it was a little bit of that style. This is a book so I do think the book is worth reading, and I do think the movie is worth watching. Now, this is one of those ones I'm not like recommending this, like saying, oh, you're going to love this book, because I didn't absolutely love the book, but it was different enough, odd enough, interesting enough of an experience that I think is worth reading. So that was Hot Milk by Deborah Levy. Then we have read a few books by Nicholson Baker that we really liked. One was the Fermata, which we read a couple years ago now, I guess, that we did talk about, and we'll link below, which was, we think, an absolute masterpiece about a guy that he's got the special power that he can stop time and enter what's called the fold, where the rest of the world is frozen, and does all sort of things. And this is a vehicle for a main aspect of the book, which is increasing levels of increasing levels of extremity in terms of sexual experiences. And it is really an absolute masterclass in the use of constantly shifting narrative forms to draw the reader further down that road, to draw you in more and more for these more and more intense scenarios. So we thought that book was phenomenal. So we then read another book. That book was It was early 90s. We then read this book, Vox, which was also early 90s. And this book was kind of shorter, but the whole book was these two people having a conversation over one of these old telephone chat rooms, but they take it private, so it's just the two of them, and they have this conversation, a big element of which is, again, this sort of the increasing sexual challenges, but all verbally on the phone. And so it is a common theme in a number of Baker's books, but we also enjoyed this one. And so we found yet another one of his books in the wild, and so we picked it up. This is called Checkpoint. So this is published in 2004, and this book was very similar to Vox. This was all one conversation between two individuals. So there's this guy, Jay and Ben. And so Jay invites Ben to a hotel room because he wants to talk to him about something. They're old friends. I think they haven't seen each other in a couple years. And so he invites him to the hotel room, at which point he tells him that I have to be careful with the words. I don't want to get this to get flagged, but Jay, so this was set back in the early 2000s. So the president at the time was George Bush, George W. And so U.S. president. And so Jay tells Ben that he wants to unalive this individual, okay? And so it starts a long discussion of all there is a fair bit of political discussion between these two about the different different actions that have been taken, in terms of politics and war and all the things that he disagrees with and that are horrific in his view, and something needs to be done about that. And he has the solution. He's going to take it upon himself to get this done. And so Ben, who he's talking to, is actually does not disagree with him about a lot of his points, and Ben actually has a lot of insight from research. I think it was research into a book that he had done in the past. So he's pretty knowledgeable on some of these things, and he adds a lot of information actually about the things that Jay is talking about. But he's more rationalized. He hasn't been. Ben is just trying to talk Jay down, about what Jay's intentions are, and so. It was pretty interesting, I thought, because it was one of those ones. It took a little bit of thinking, both as I was going through it and after it, to appreciate its value. And I think it was a lot about. I think sometimes we, often ask this question, like, if you could go back in time to an individual and you had the opportunity. To meet an individual like Hitler and kill them, and save all this heartache and all these millions of lives, would you do it? Would you assassinate that person like Hitler at the time? If nothing was going to happen to you, there wasn't going to be any repercussions to you personally. I think most people, not everyone, but most people probably say yes, they would, right? They would love to. They would definitely do that to save millions of lives, take out that evil individual. But you take something like that, and I think that's an easy thing to say in the past, but you bring something like that into a present-day scenario where you may view certain individuals as almost very similar and engaging in very similar behavior. And if you were put in that same scenario, would you actually do that? Or would you actually assassinate that person? That question becomes a lot tougher, I think. And so I think this book is a bit of an exploration about how, a lot of people would, and a lot of people can be radicalized to that extent relatively easily. And people can be talked out of it relatively easily. And this book is kind of non-conclusive, leaves a little open, but it's I don't want to spoil the book, So, but I think it's a pretty interesting exploration of that issue. Politics aside, does deal with a lot of specific political issues that were happening back in the 2000s, but I think it also deals with that, how people can be swayed, and how people can be convinced to potentially engage in different, to take certain action. And they're both, this discussion takes place as a very, very rational discussion among two individuals that appear to be very rational. So anyway, so that's what that one was about. Checkpoint by Nicholas and Baker. And then finally, so we again, a few years ago, again, we've never talked about this book because this was before we started the channel, but we read a book called Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, and this book got a lot of accolades at the time. I forget if it won any awards, but it must have. This book was about. It was unusual. It was about a. It was about a professor that is taking a few of his students on this sort of. I think it's called like experimental archaeology. They're going up to northern England, but they also this sort of experimental archaeology trip is also like you're also supposed to live basically like the people did that you're studying back in the Stone Age. And so it follows this family of father, wife, and daughter, who's the main character. Three of them join this excursion. They're not students of this professor, but the father is very, very much into this sort of thing. So the professor invites him along, and he is a very, he is a very sort of sexist, strong patriarch in the family, kind of what he says goes. What's up? And so he, little snacky snack. And so so they go on this trip, and he is a little bit abusive. And so, they go on this trip, and she is, a lot of it, like I said, is really about the daughter, and she's, under the under the oppressive thumb of her father, who's like crazy into this thing, and then the students that she meets on the trip, and in particular this one girl that is a very, very carefree spirit that she is very drawn to. And so it was a little rough, and it was but it was pretty good. It was it was a pretty original story. It was pretty good. We enjoyed it. So we said we wanted to try something else by Sarah Moss. So we saw this in the wild and picked it up. And this is Summer Water. So what this book is about is, so this was published in 2020. And this is about so it's about different groups of people that are, it takes place in this, they call it a vacation park, I guess, or a holiday park in Scotland. It's like it's near a loch, up like along a 10-mile stretch of road, out in the middle of nowhere. And you have these wooden, just these wooden lodges. And there's different, there's there's couples that live in a couple of them, and then a few families that are in a couple of them, and they're mostly renting them, but I think some people own them too. And so you see a bunch of these different families or different people within these different lodges, and so they kind of watch each other a little bit, although they don't really interact, and there wasn't really anything that I liked about this book, to be honest with you. I pretty much disliked everything about this. So I hate doing that. I hate hating on books. I almost DNF this, even though I almost never purposely DNF books. But I only didn't just because I really hate doing that, and it's kind of short, so I finished it. But it was, I was really surprised because, Ghost Wall got so much acclaim, and I liked it, even though it wasn't the easiest read. Moss is a professor, and a lot of people like her, and so I was really surprised to see actually how much I disliked this book. Part of it was just the part of it the way it was marketed, and I realize the author probably doesn't have a lot to do with that, but I normally don't read these things, but just real quick, it's just so you can get an idea, they rarely speak to one another, but they do take notice, watching from the safety of the park's rented cabins, peering into the half-lit drizzle of a Scottish summer day, forming judgments based on what little they know of their temporary neighbors. It is the longest day of the year, and as the hours pass nearly imperceptibly, 12 people shift from being strangers to bystanders to allies, their idle curiosity sparked into action as tragedy sneaks into their lives. The book was nothing about that. The whole book was just, it was like you were in the heads of these. You would go from one individual to another. Each of these chapters would go to a different individual, and you'd be in their head, like what they're thinking, and everything that I just read to you, that all happened in literally the last 5 pages. There was something happens at the very end, not that crazy of a thing, and this sort of finally interacting with each other and pitching in to deal with this thing. Again, not that big a deal. All happened in that last 5 pages. There was just a bunch of stories about these individual people who barely watched each other. That barely happened at all either. You had the occasional noticing, from afar the family in that cabin, but it's not like people were obsessing about each other or anything. So I don't know what that was about on the jacket. Totally mismarketed. The readings, the writing style was, really didn't like it and found it very unreadable. It was very, very stream of conscious sort of, writing. long sentences, lot of clauses, a lot of common clauses, and I could kind of get that, like, because you're supposed to be in the person's head. Each time you're doing it from their point of view, and what they're thinking. So I kind of get that a little bit, but it was pretty unreadable, and it was annoying to read, and more so there was a lot of these sentences were not. I thought it was not very good writing, which surprised me because, I always feel a little self-conscious saying that about books and authors like this because, this is a professor that teaches it. So, but it seemed like bad writing to me because, like, in addition to these very long stream of conscious sentences, it was constantly, I don't know what the term for it is. I think it's like misplaced modifiers or something like that. It's like almost like passive voice, but like on a much bigger scale, right? Where you have sentences that are broke. You have entire like separate clauses breaking up the thoughts within the sentences. Like misplaced clauses, and it would sometimes cause discontinuity in verb tenses and stuff. Like it seemed like bad writing to me. And maybe it's me, but I really didn't like it for those reasons. I really hated reading the text, and so and I just didn't. I didn't think there was so much. You got to see it. I don't know if it's. I don't want to be that guy, but I got like a little bit of a feminist feel from it because there was. You did see both from men and women's perspectives, but I left this book with a much heavier sense of the women's perspectives that seemed to be much more of that and more weighty. And a lot of, there was for a number of them, it was like it was like sort of this preoccupation with the burdens that they have, and a number of times this sort of preoccupation with sex with their husbands or the need to have sex with their husbands, or maybe wanting to avoid having sex with their husbands. It seemed to be like a preoccupation among the women in the story, number of the women in the story. So, I don't know. It really wasn't for me. I just really didn't like it at all. It was. This is actually. I just saw this was also turned into a show. I don't know where the show is, but there's apparently a series of this Summer Water, and so I watched the trailer because this is a book. Is like, I don't know how you could possibly make this into even a movie, much less a show, because the whole thing is like inside these different individuals' heads and a bunch of different ones that you don't see them a lot. That's another thing. The book is short. There's a whole bunch of characters, and the book is not that long. It's like 200 pages, so none of these characters gets very developed. You know what I mean? Like, you don't like really get invested and attached to any of these characters, really. So, at least I didn't. And so I'm like, I don't know how you could possibly make a TV show out of this. And I watched the trailer, and the TV show is like nothing like the book. It looks like the TV show is, it just uses the setting and the characters, but then there's all these, like, it looks like there's all these mysteries and romances and dramas and stuff that take place in that show that seem to be fabricated for the show and were not in this book at all. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know. We would not recommend this one. So, we're not gonna try this author again. I don't think, because even that part where I could maybe kind of excuse that sort of writing style, my recollection is even that writing style, mechanically, was present in Ghostwall, and I think it was the part of Ghostwall that I didn't like that much, that made it a little hard at times. So I don't think that's why she did it. I think that's how she writes. I think. So that's probably the last time I'll try Sarah Moss, unfortunately. So okay, so that does it. We those were the books we read in early June. We have other things to tell you about, but that was the those were sort of had the sort of modern non-sci-fi horror literature that we read earlier this month. Hot Milk by Deborah Levy, Checkpoint by Nicholson Baker, and Summer Water by Sarah Moss. So let us know if you've read any of these books or any of these authors, If you have thoughts on them, if you agree with us, you disagree with us, we're curious to hear your thoughts. So, as always, you have anything else to add on these? You have anything to add to, on these books? You have any further opinions on them? No strong opinions on these? No? Okay. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again very soon. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you next time.